At 10:17 that Friday morning, a man in white bakery pants walked through the front doors of Aldridge Middle School with flour still on his forearms. He had been awake since 3:45. He had already worked nearly 6 hours. He had left an unfinished shift, driven 22 miles in 31 minutes, and parked his old car crookedly because, for once in his life, he had not taken the extra seconds to straighten it. He did not come in shouting. He did not come in asking for sympathy. He walked into the main office, saw his 14-year-old son sitting alone against a wall, and asked the principal one question. "Is there footage of my son taking the money?" There was not. But an hour and 42 minutes earlier, in a cafeteria full of 240 students, Principal Sandra Okafor had used a different word. Expelled. The morning Marcus Hale was expelled, the cafeteria was full. That was the part people would remember later. Not only the accusation, not only the principal's voice, not only the scrape of chairs as students turned in their seats. They would remember that there was nowhere to look away. It was Friday breakfast at Aldridge Middle School. The cafeteria smelled like syrup, fried potatoes, cinnamon rolls, and the permanent institutional undertone no amount of disinfectant ever quite removes. 240 students talked across long tables, traded jokes, opened cartons, checked phones they were not supposed to have out. Then Principal Okafor entered with the vice principal and a security aide. The noise did not disappear at once. It folded in on itself. Conversations stopped one table at a time. Forks paused. Heads turned. Marcus Hale was standing near the center aisle with a breakfast tray in his hands. He was 14 years old. Quiet. Thin. Dark-haired. The kind of student adults described as no trouble, because they had not taken the time to learn what else he was. For 4 seconds after the principal spoke, he continued holding the tray. 4 seconds is not a long time. But in a cafeteria full of middle school students, in the silence that followed, it was long enough for every person in the room to understand that something significant was happening to one boy, and that whatever came next would follow him long after breakfast was over. "Marcus Hale," Principal Okafor said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "There are serious allegations of theft against you. Under the school's emergency discipline policy, you are being expelled from Aldridge effective immediately, pending district review." The word landed before the explanation did. Expelled. Marcus set his tray down on the nearest table. He did not drop it. He did not say anything. He looked at the principal, then down at the tiled floor, then briefly at his friend Darius. Darius stood 6 feet away with his mouth slightly open, as though his body had not yet decided what expression belonged on a face when someone you know is being publicly dismantled. The security aide stepped forward. "Come with us, Marcus." So Marcus went. He did not know then that his father would be at the school before lunch. He did not know that the principal would later stand in that same cafeteria and say his name again for a different reason. And he did not know that the thing people would remember most clearly was not the accusation. It was the flour. Marcus had lived in the East Side neighborhood his whole life. Aldridge Middle School served 3 parts of the city: East Side, North Side, and the newer development district near the river. The students came into the same building every morning, sat in the same classrooms, stood in the same lunch lines, and learned very quickly that adults liked to say children did not notice class differences nearly as much as children actually did. Marcus knew which students got dropped off in new SUVs. He knew which ones had expensive shoes that stayed clean even in bad weather. He knew who could talk about vacations without ever explaining that they were vacations. And he knew that East Side meant something in the minds of certain people before he had said a word. He was not a remarkable student in the ways schools most often measured. His grades were adequate in math and science. He was not loud. He had never been sent to the principal's office. He did not join clubs because he went home after school and helped his father with dinner, laundry, groceries, and the ordinary logistics of a small household, where both people had responsibilities. But in English and history, he was different. His teacher, Mr. Rossi, had noticed in October. The assignment had been simple: 2 pages about one specific moment. Most students wrote about sports games, family trips, pets, birthdays. Marcus wrote about the morning his father took him to the top floor of a parking garage before an early shift. He wrote about the city before sunrise, when the streetlights were still on but the sky had begun to turn blue. He wrote about his father's hands resting on the railing. He wrote about the quiet between them without explaining what the quiet meant. Mr. O.C. read it twice. In the margin he wrote, "This is the difference between describing and knowing. You know." Marcus had folded that paper and put it in the back of a drawer at home. After that, Mr. O.C. began finding small ways to keep him writing. Not publicly. Marcus did not want that kind of attention. But when the class read primary sources in history, Mr. O.C. would ask Marcus what detail everyone else had missed. When students wrote paragraphs that sounded correct but felt empty, he would sometimes hold up Marcus's work without naming the author and say, "Notice the difference between a sentence that reports a thing and a sentence that has actually seen it." Marcus never knew what to do with praise. He usually lowered his head and pretended to be looking for a pen. But he listened. And Mr. O'Shea listened too. He understood that Marcus's quietness was not the absence of a voice. It was a voice waiting for a place where it would not be interrupted. He had one close friend at school. Darius. Another East Side kid with an easier laugh and a quicker way of speaking to strangers. They ate together every morning. On Fridays, Marcus bought breakfast from the cafeteria. It was a small, reliable pleasure. Cinnamon roll, potatoes, milk. Nothing important to anyone else. Until it became the meal he never got to eat. The accusation had begun the previous afternoon in the school library. A student named Preston Whitfield had been using a computer 2 stations away from Marcus. Preston came from Northside. He wore expensive clothes in the way expensive clothes are designed to look casual. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a boy who had been treated, for most of his life, as though the spaces around him were naturally his. He had left his backpack open beside the computer. Near the end of the hour, he said $40 was missing from the front pocket. A teacher called the vice principal. The vice principal reviewed library footage. The camera showed Marcus walking past Preston's desk on his way to return a book. It did not show him opening the backpack. It did not show him taking money. It did not show money in his hands. It showed a quiet boy from East Side walking past a desk belonging to a confident boy from North Side. And in the particular social ecosystem of Aldridge Middle School, proximity became a story. The vice principal brought the footage to Principal Okafor before school began on Friday. Preston repeated that the money had been in his bag. He said Marcus had been nearby. He said he had no reason to make it up. That last sentence carried more weight than it should have. No one called Marcus's father before the cafeteria announcement. No one waited for more evidence. No one stopped to ask why a boy with no disciplinary record would suddenly steal $40 in a library full of cameras. At 8:35, Principal Okafor walked into the cafeteria with procedure on her mind and judgment set aside. Marcus was taken to the main office. At 8:45, the secretary called the number on file. Thomas Hale's phone rang in a locker on the industrial side of the city. Marcus sat in a chair against the wall. The chair was hard plastic, beige, bolted to the floor beside a bulletin board with college pennants and a poster about student leadership. He could see through the interior office window but not clearly. Principal Okafor was moving from room to room. The secretary typed. The vice principal spoke quietly into a phone. Nobody spoke to Marcus unless it was necessary. He did not cry. He was the kind of person who processed things inwardly. That had protected him at times. It had also made it easier for adults to mistake his silence for resilience, when sometimes silence was only the place a person went because they did not know what else they were allowed to do. He thought about the cafeteria. He thought about the word expelled. He thought about Darius standing 6 feet away with his mouth open. He thought about Preston's face. Preston had not looked frightened. He had looked watchful, slightly bright, like someone observing a consequence he believed belonged to someone else. Marcus thought about his English essay. He thought about whether Mr. Osei would still be his teacher next week. He thought about the fact that he had not taken $40, and that this seemed like it should matter more than where he had walked in a library. Then he thought about his father. Thomas Hale was 41 years old and worked the early shift at a commercial bakery 22 miles from home. He woke at 3:45 every morning. By 4:30 he was on the production floor, where the air was warm with yeast, sugar, steel, and heat. He worked until noon, usually. He wore white bakery pants, work boots, and a company shirt with the bakery name stitched over the left chest. Thomas did not earn enough money to make life easy, but he had built a life that worked. His car was 11 years old and had more than 200,000 miles on it. It ran because Thomas maintained it. He replaced what failed. He saved where he could. He did not take reliable things for granted because he had learned that reliability was not a luxury. It was a requirement. He had raised Marcus alone for 6 years. Marcus's mother had left without a dramatic scene and without a useful villain. She had needed a life that was not theirs, and Thomas had explained it to Marcus with as little bitterness as possible. He had never taught his son to hate her. He had only taught him that people sometimes leave when staying would be dishonest. What Thomas taught Marcus instead was simpler: the work and the standard. The work was what you did every day, whether you felt like it or not. The standard was the level below which you did not let yourself drop, even when no one was watching. Thomas did not deliver speeches about these things. He got up at 3:45. He kept the car running. He put food in the refrigerator. He showed up. Marcus had learned the shape of that reliability without ever hearing it described. His father was the person who left a note on the fridge when the milk was almost gone. The person who knew which bus came late when it rained. The person who asked before offering advice, what exactly happened? It was why Marcus thought of him in the office chair. Not because Thomas could make every bad thing disappear. Marcus was old enough to know he could not. But because when Thomas arrived, the facts would be treated like facts. And that was sometimes the first form of rescue. At 9:30, Thomas took his break. He opened his locker, picked up his phone, and listened to the voicemail from Aldridge Middle School. He listened once. Then he did not call back. He walked directly to his supervisor. A man named Gerald who had worked at the bakery for 20 years and knew Thomas well enough to recognize the difference between ordinary stress and something that required immediate action. "My son has been suspended from school under an accusation," Thomas said. "He's there alone. I need to leave." Gerald looked toward the production floor. "The shift isn't finished," he said. Thomas nodded once. "My son is sitting in a school office accused of something he didn't do," he said. "Nobody is with him. I'm leaving." Gerald looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Go, we'll sort the shift." Thomas did not say thank you because there was no time. He took off his apron, left through the employee entrance, and drove 22 miles in 31 minutes. He did not speed recklessly. Thomas was not reckless, but he moved through traffic with the total focus of a man who had already made every decision that mattered. At 10:17, he walked into Aldridge Middle School, with flowers still on his arms. The secretary looked up. She took in the white pants, the worn boots, the company shirt, the flower. Her greeting arrived half a beat late, carrying the invisible weight of an assumption formed before Thomas had spoken. "Can I help you?" "I'm Thomas Hale," he said. "Marcus Hale's father. I received a voicemail from Principal Okafor. Please have a seat. I'll let her know you're here." Thomas did not sit. He stood at the counter and looked through the interior office window. Marcus was in the chair against the wall, hands folded in his lap. Then Marcus looked up. Something changed in his face. Not relief exactly. Relief comes after safety. This was the first movement toward it. The look of someone who had been holding a weight alone and had just realized another person had reached for the other side. Principal Okafor came out 2 minutes later. She extended her hand. Thomas shook it. He looked at her with complete attention. Not aggressive, not deferential, just present. She said, "Mr. Hale, I appreciate you coming in. I understand this is a difficult morning. There has been an allegation. Is there footage of my son taking the money?" Thomas asked. The principal paused. The footage places Marcus in the vicinity of the student's belongings. Thomas did not move. "Is there footage of my son taking the money?" "The footage does not definitively show. Yes or no, ma'am?" She looked at him. "No." "Is there any evidence that he took it other than the fact that he walked past a desk?" "The school has a responsibility to investigate credible reports of theft." "I understand that," Thomas said. "I'm asking what evidence you have against my son specifically." "The investigation is ongoing. You expelled him in front of 240 students before you called his parent, before you had evidence, based on the fact that he walked past a desk." Principal Okafor said, "We followed our emergency discipline procedure." Thomas's voice stayed level. "I'd like to see that procedure in writing." The secretary had stopped typing. The vice principal stood near his office doorway, very still. Principal Okafor looked at Thomas Hale, at the flower on his forearms, the bakery logo on his shirt, the calm in his face. She understood, perhaps for the first time that morning, that this man was not going to be redirected by her office, her title, or the language of procedure. He was not loud. That was what made the room feel different. Thomas said, "I'm not here to make your morning difficult. I'm here because my son has been publicly accused of theft without evidence, and I need to understand what happens now." "The investigation will proceed," she said. "If the allegation is not substantiated, Marcus will be cleared. What happens to his record? If he is cleared, the school will— 240 students heard you call him expelled. What happens to the record of that? Administrative records are handled according to district policy. I'd like a copy of that policy, and the name of the district student rights coordinator. I can provide that. Thank you, and I'd like my son to come home with me now." Principal Okafor said she could release Marcus into his father's custody while the district review continued. Thomas nodded. "I appreciate that." Then he walked to the chair against the wall. He did not stand over his son. He pulled a chair beside him and sat down. Marcus looked at him. Thomas looked back. "You didn't take it," Thomas said. It was not a question. "No," Marcus said. "All right." That was all. Thomas stood, signed the release form and placed one hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder as they walked out of the office. Not gripping, just there. They went through the front doors into the morning light. The school behind them sounded ordinary. Lockers, footsteps, distant voices, a building continuing as though it had not just made one boy's whole world feel suddenly unsafe. In the car, Thomas said nothing for the first 5 minutes. Marcus watched the school disappear in the side mirror. Then he said, "How did you get here so fast?" "I left work." "You'll lose the shift." "Yeah, Dad." Thomas kept both hands on the wheel. "Marcus," he said, "you are not worth less than a shift. You understand that?" Marcus looked out the window. She said it in front of everyone. "I know." Darius was right there. "I know." The silence that followed was not empty. Marcus said, "Did you read the school policy before you went in?" Thomas glanced at him briefly. "I read what I could find on their website between 9:30 and when I left." That was exactly what Marcus expected his father to say. His father would not arrive loud. He would arrive ready. At home, Thomas heated leftover pasta because Marcus had missed breakfast. He set a bowl on the table, waited until Marcus ate a few bites, then opened his laptop. "Here's what happens next," he said. "I'm calling the district. I'm calling the student rights coordinator. And I'm calling the attorney whose card I kept after our landlord tried to keep our deposit. You think we need a lawyer? Marcus asked. Thomas looked at him. I think when a school publicly accuses a 14-year-old of theft without evidence, they should be prepared to account for it. That afternoon, Thomas began making calls. He was polite, he was specific, and he had printed the district conduct policy, marked the relevant passages in pen, and placed it in a neat stack beside the phone. The student rights coordinator expected an upset parent. Instead, she got a man who asked for confirmation of the parent notification timeline, the evidentiary threshold for emergency expulsion, and the school's procedure for correcting a public disciplinary action that had been issued before evidence existed. He did not raise his voice. He did not say lawsuit. He read the policy back to her line by line. Finally, after a pause, she said, "Based on what you're describing, the notification requirement was not met before the action was announced." Thomas said, "I appreciate you confirming that. I'd like it in writing." The next call went to David Kim, the attorney whose card Thomas had kept for 3 years in the drawer with the lease, the car title, and Marcus's birth certificate. David listened for 7 minutes without interrupting. Then he said, "I need the school's written documentation, not their explanation, their documentation." Thomas requested it the next morning. The request took 2 days to fulfill. What it produced was thin. The documentation listed the basis for Marcus's expulsion as student report of theft in video places accused in vicinity. There was no image of Marcus taking cash, no witness statement, no parent notification before the cafeteria announcement, no explanation for why a public expulsion had been necessary before a basic investigation was complete. David Kim read the documents at his office late that afternoon. Then he called Thomas. "You have a due process problem," he said, "and you have a procedural violation. Neither requires a courtroom right now. What it requires is a letter." He wrote one. It did not threaten. It did not exaggerate. It did not use dramatic language. It named the rules. It named the timeline. It asked how the district intended to correct the harm to Marcus's record, his reputation, and his right to fair treatment. It also asked a question neither Thomas nor David expected the school to answer quickly. What was the district's procedure for repairing a public accusation once it had been proven unsupported? The question mattered because Marcus had not been removed quietly. He had been branded in front of a room full of classmates. A cleared file was necessary. It was not enough. Thomas understood that distinction in the plain way he understood most things. If someone broke a window in your home, they did not get credit for sweeping up the glass. They fixed the window. And they made sure the people who saw it broken understood what had happened. Principal Okafor received the letter on Wednesday. She read it twice. Then she called the district office. The district office called General Counsel. General Counsel called David Kim. By Wednesday afternoon, Principal Okafor had reviewed the camera footage again. This time she watched it without Preston's certainty in the room, without the first assumption already built around the image. Marcus walked past a backpack. That was all. A boy moving through a library. She sat at her desk for a long time afterward. She thought about the cafeteria, about the security aide, about the word expelled leaving her mouth in a room where a child had no place to hide from it. She had told herself she was acting quickly because schools had to take theft seriously. But urgency had not made her fair. It had only made her decisive before she was right. And while adults in offices began to understand the weight of their mistake, Marcus stayed home from school. He did homework in the morning. He helped Thomas with dinner. He did not ask to see the cafeteria again. Darius texted him every day. The first message said, "Everybody knows you didn't do it." Marcus read it 3 times before responding. "How?" Darius replied, "Because Preston keeps saying you did and nobody believes him now." Marcus put the phone down. It was not justice. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the story that had been built around him. The truth came out 3 days later. Preston Whitfield's mother was cleaning his room before a family visit. She found $40 folded inside the pocket of a jacket Preston had worn the day before the library incident. He had packed up his backpack, shoved the cash into the jacket, and forgotten it there. Preston had not deliberately lied. He had simply been wrong. But he had been wrong with certainty, and he had been wrong with enough social credibility that adults had believed the shape of his accusation before they had looked for proof. Principal Okafor called Thomas on Thursday evening. She said she wanted to speak to him directly before a written communication went out. "The investigation is complete," she said. "Marcus has been fully exonerated. The expulsion decision will be rescinded. His record will be cleared." Thomas listened. Then she said, "I owe you and Marcus an apology for the public announcement, for acting before we had evidence, for not calling you first." There was a pause. "I followed a procedure," she said, "but I did not use judgment. Those two things should never come apart the way they did here." Thomas said, "I appreciate you calling personally. I would also like to apologize to Marcus directly," she said. "And I need to talk with him about how the public correction should be handled. It happened in front of everyone. I don't believe a private correction is enough." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Ask him what he wants." Marcus thought about the meeting for a day. Then he said yes. The following Monday, he returned to Aldridge Middle School. He arrived through the front entrance with Thomas beside him. The halls looked exactly the same. Lockers, flyers, teachers carrying folders, the same old smell of waxed floors and cafeteria food drifting down the corridor. But Marcus did not feel the same walking through them. Darius saw him first and crossed the hallway before the bell rang. "You good?" he asked. Marcus considered the question. "I'm here," he said. Darius nodded. "That counts." The meeting with Principal Okafor happened after school. Thomas sat to Marcus's left. David Kim had offered to attend, but Thomas had decided it was not necessary. The district had already agreed to expunge the record, issue written clearance, and place a modest settlement into a protected education account. The money was not the point. It formalized the district's acknowledgement that a serious procedural wrong had occurred. The point now was Marcus. Principal Okafor spoke directly to him. She did not hide behind the institution. She did not blame the vice principal, Preston, the cameras, the policy, or the pace of a busy school day. "I was responsible," she said. "I walked into that cafeteria, thinking about procedure, optics, and control. I was not thinking about you. I allowed public humiliation to become a disciplinary tool. It should never be one." Marcus looked at her. He had expected the apology to feel like something managed, something designed to close the matter on the school's terms. But she looked uncomfortable in the honest way, not the performative way. He said, "Why did you assume it was me?" The principal did not answer immediately. Then she said, "Because I did not examine my assumptions carefully enough. And the assumptions I did not examine were shaped by things I should have recognized in myself and in this school." Marcus looked down at his hands. "That's a good enough answer if you mean it," he said. "I mean it." He nodded slowly. "I'm not going to say it's fine," he said. "It wasn't." "No," Principal Okafor said. "It wasn't." Then she asked the question she had promised Thomas she would ask. "The correction was not private," she said. "How do you want it handled?" Marcus looked at the office window, at the hallway outside, at the building where 100 small judgments happened every day and were usually invisible to the people making them. Then he said, "You said it in the cafeteria." The principal waited. "The people who heard you should hear that I didn't do it," Marcus said. "I don't want a speech about me. I just want them to know the truth." Principal Okafor nodded. "You have my word." The next day, at Friday breakfast, the cafeteria was full again. The same long tables, the same trays, the same smell of syrup, potatoes, and cinnamon. Marcus stood at the end of the line beside Darius. He had considered staying home. Thomas would not have argued. But Marcus had said he wanted to be there. Principal Okafor entered with no security aid this time. She stepped to the center aisle. The room began to quiet. Some students recognized the shape of the moment before she spoke. "Last Friday," she said, "I publicly disciplined Marcus Hale before the school had evidence that he had done anything wrong." The room went still. Marcus did not take the money. The allegation was false. His record has been fully cleared. She paused. The school failed to treat him with fairness and dignity. I was responsible for that failure. I am sorry, Marcus. She did not keep speaking. She did not turn the apology into a lesson about herself. She did not ask the students to clap. She stepped aside. For a second, the cafeteria stayed silent. Then Darius reached across the table and touched Marcus's shoulder once. It was not applause. It was better. It was a simple acknowledgement from the person who had been there when Marcus's tray was still in his hands, and the whole room had turned toward him. At the next table, one girl looked toward Preston and then away. Someone in the back muttered that the school had messed up. The sound did not become a scene. Marcus was grateful for that. He did not need a crowd to repair what a crowd had witnessed. He only needed the truth to exist in the same room where the lie had been allowed to grow. Marcus took his breakfast and sat down. The cinnamon roll was not especially good, but he ate it. Mr. Osei found Marcus in the hallway after first period. He did not begin with the accusation. He did not ask Marcus to retell anything. Instead, he said, "The district writing competition closes next Friday. I told them you'd be submitting." Marcus looked at him. "You didn't ask me. I asked you 3 weeks ago. You said you'd think about it." "I did." Mr. Osei smiled slightly. "And I've been thinking about it for you." Marcus folded his arms. "What's the prompt?" "Write about a moment when you understood something about the world that you hadn't understood before." Marcus looked down the hallway. He thought about the cafeteria, the office chair, his father's flower-covered arms, the way Thomas had sat beside him instead of standing over him, the sentence about being worth more than a shift. "I can do that," he said. That night, Marcus opened a blank document at the kitchen table. Thomas was asleep after his early shift. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator and the faint traffic outside. Marcus wrote for 2 hours. He did not write directly about being accused. He wrote about a boy watching his father drive 22 miles in work clothes he had not had time to change because somewhere in the city his son was sitting in a chair against a wall and needed someone to sit beside him. He wrote about flour. He wrote about the difference between being defended and being believed. He wrote about a man who did not shout because he did not need to. A man who knew that the right question, asked at the right moment, could carry more force than any raised voice. He wrote about the sentence his father had said in the car, "You are not worth less than a shift." He did not explain the flour. He trusted the reader to understand it. When he finished, he read the draft aloud once under his breath. Some sentences sounded too much like a school assignment. He removed them. Some tried to make his father sound larger than life. He removed those too. Thomas did not need to be made larger. The power of the story was that he had arrived exactly as he was, tired, unwashed, prepared, and present. Mr. Osei read the draft on a Wednesday evening after his own children had gone to bed. He read it once, then again more slowly. The next morning he found Marcus before first period. "Don't change anything," he said. Marcus blinked. "Nothing? The third paragraph runs long. Fix that. Everything else, leave alone." Marcus shortened 2 sentences and submitted the essay from the library computer bank. The same computer bank he had walked past when Preston's backpack had been sitting open on a desk. 2 weeks later, the results came out. Marcus placed second in the district competition. The judge's comment was printed beneath the list of winners. It said, "This piece demonstrates an understanding of dignity, both its violation and its restoration, that is rare in any writer and extraordinary in one this young. The writer does not explain what they know. They show it in the specific and unadorned way that writing shows things when the writer has actually lived them. The flower stays with you. Thomas read the results at the kitchen table after work. Marcus had printed the page and left it there without saying anything. Thomas read the judge's words once. Then he read them again. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in the drawer where he kept important documents: the car title, the lease, Marcus's school records, the college account statements Marcus did not yet know existed. Later that evening, Marcus was doing homework at the kitchen table when Thomas came in from the garage after checking the car's oil. Thomas washed his hands properly this time, with orange-scented soap and warm water. Marcus had always associated that smell with his father coming home from something physical. Work completed. Work put away. Thomas dried his hands on a towel. "Eat something before 9, he said. "There's food in the fridge." "I know," Thomas said. "I put it there." Marcus looked up. "Did you see the results?" "I saw them. Second place. Second place is a real place." Marcus almost smiled. "Mr. Ossie said the judge called me extraordinary. Mr. Ossie was right to push you toward it." Marcus waited. "Are you going to say anything else?" Thomas looked at him. He thought about the voicemail, the unfinished shift, the drive, the office chair, the flower, the cafeteria correction, the essay Marcus had written without needing to explain what it meant. Then he said, "You wrote what you knew. That's the hardest thing to do. And you did it." Marcus nodded. He went back to his book. Thomas went to bed at 9:45. His alarm was set for 3:45. He had another shift at 4:30. Before he closed his eyes, he thought about nothing dramatic. Not the letter from the attorney, not the district's settlement, not the principal's apology. He thought about his son at the kitchen table, focused over a page. He thought about the chair against the wall. He thought about the simplest truth in the world. When your son is sitting alone in a school office and nobody is beside him, you get in the car. You drive the 22 miles. You do not stop to wash your arms first. The next shift would begin at 4:30. Thomas would be there. He was always there. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. All characters, companies, locations, and events are entirely invented. Any resemblance to real persons or institutions is coincidental.